Have you ever wondered if the very pain you're begging to escape could actually be the doorway to the life you've been praying for? Stop for a moment and consider this mystical possibility. What if every tear you've cried has been watering seeds of greatness you didn't even know were planted within you? What if every sleepless night of worry has been expanding your capacity for compassion? What if every rejection, every betrayal, every moment when life knocked you to your knees was actually the universe's way of teaching you how to stand in a power you never knew you possessed? I know it sounds impossible when you're in the middle of the storm, when your heart is shattered, when your dreams lie in pieces, when everything you've built seems to crumble before your eyes. So the last thing you want to hear is that this pain has purpose. But what if I told you that every great leader, every revolutionary, every person who changed the world for the better walked through the exact same fire you're walking through right now? What if I showed you that suffering isn't your sentence, it's your seminary, preparing you for a ministry you can't yet imagine? Pain has always been the seed of power in human history. Consider Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for 27 years on Robben Island, treated like an animal, stripped of everything except his dignity and his dream. The world thought apartheid had buried him alive. But in that concrete cell, something greater was being forged. Every day of captivity was actually a day of preparation. Every humiliation was building the humility he'd need to lead not with revenge, but with reconciliation. When he finally walked free, he didn't emerge as a broken man seeking vengeance. He emerged as a healer who could unite a divided nation. His prison became his presidency preparation program, designed by divine hands. Abraham Lincoln failed in business, suffered a nervous breakdown, lost numerous political elections, and endured the death of his beloved Anne Rutledge. Society labeled him a failure, a laughingstock, a man destined for obscurity. But every failure was building the resilience he'd need to hold a fractured nation together. Every personal loss was developing the empathy he'd need to understand a country's grief. Every defeat was teaching him that true victory comes not from avoiding struggle, but from transforming it into service. His failures became his qualifications to lead America through its darkest hour and greatest transformation. The Bible echoes this divine pattern through Joseph's story. Betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned. From the outside, it looked like God had forgotten him completely. But every injustice was positioning him for influence. Every betrayal was building the character he'd need to forgive on a national scale. Every false accusation was developing the integrity he'd need to serve with honor. When famine threatened to destroy Egypt and the surrounding nations, Pharaoh needed someone who understood both suffering and provision, someone who had learned to find hope in hopeless situations. Joseph's pain wasn't punishment. It was preparation for the moment when his personal survival would become a nation's salvation. What if your rejection today is the training ground for your leadership tomorrow? What if the door that slammed in your face was actually protecting you from settling for less than your divine destiny? What if the person who broke your heart was unconsciously preparing you to love with greater wisdom and strength? This reveals the profound law of contrast that governs human transformation. The people who have brought the greatest light to the world are often those who have experienced the deepest darkness. Helen Keller, trapped in a world without sight or sound, could have retreated into self-pity and isolation. Instead, her blindness became vision for humanity. She couldn't see with her eyes, but she saw possibilities others missed. She couldn't hear with her ears, but she heard the cries of the oppressed with startling clarity. Her physical limitations became spiritual liberations, allowing her to develop senses that transcended the physical realm. She became a voice for the voiceless, a light for those lost in their own darkness, proof that our greatest disabilities can become our most distinctive abilities. Martin Luther King Jr. faced persecution, imprisonment, death threats, and constant fear for his family's safety. He had every reason to remain quiet, to protect himself, to choose personal safety over public service. But his suffering became his strength. Every act of hatred directed toward him increased his capacity for love. Every attempt to silence him amplified his voice. Every jail cell became a cathedral where he wrote sermons that would outlive his persecutors. His persecution didn't weaken his purpose. It purified it, refined it, made it unshakable and undeniable. The Apostle Paul wrote some of the most influential letters in human history from prison cells. Chained to Roman guards, confined in cramped, dark spaces, isolated from the communities he loved. Yet these letters shaped the faith of billions and continue to offer hope to prisoners of every kind. His physical imprisonment became spiritual freedom for countless souls. His forced isolation became intimate connection with the divine. His apparent weakness became strength that has endured for over 2,000 years. Could your struggle be the very contrast that defines your calling? Could the darkness you're walking through be developing your ability to recognize and reflect light in ways that will guide others out of their own shadows? Could your deepest wounds be creating the very spaces where divine healing will flow through you to heal others? Pain often functions as divine GPS, redirecting us when we've taken wrong turns or when our original destinations were too small for our actual purpose. Thomas Edison didn't fail 1,000 times trying to invent the light bulb. He discovered 1,000 ways that didn't work, each failure bringing him closer to the illumination that would light up the world. Every setback was actually a setup for breakthrough. Every wrong turn was course correction toward the right discovery. His persistence through apparent failure became the very quality that made him one of history's greatest inventors. Steve Jobs was fired from Apple, the company he co-founded, a public humiliation that devastated his ego and his identity. He could have retreated in bitterness and defeat. Instead, he used that rejection as rocket fuel, founding companies that pushed the boundaries of animation and technology. When he returned to Apple years later, he brought back wisdom gained through wandering, innovations born from exile, and a vision expanded by apparent failure. His firing wasn't the end of his Apple story. It was the intermission before the greatest comeback in business history. Watch the salmon as they fight upstream, their bodies battered against rocks, their energy depleted by currents that seemed determined to push them backward. Observers might think they're struggling against nature, fighting a losing battle. But the struggle is the path. The resistance they encounter isn't punishment, it's preparation. Every muscle developed fighting those currents will be needed for the spawning season ahead. Every scar earned in upstream battles becomes a badge of honor, proof they have what it takes to continue their species' legacy. The prophet Jonah tried to run from his divine assignment, only to find himself in the belly of a whale. What seemed like divine punishment was actually divine protection, keeping him safe until he was ready to embrace his calling. His detour wasn't derailment, it was redirection. His apparent failure wasn't final, it was formative. Sometimes God uses storms to change our direction, whales to provide transportation, and what looks like death to deliver us exactly where we need to be. Could your setback be God's way of rerouting you to destiny? Could the door that closed be protection from a path that would have led you away from your true purpose? Could the relationship that ended be clearing space for connections that will truly support your soul's mission? The painful process of relinquishing control often reveals our greatest source of strength. Julius Caesar's obsession with control ultimately led to his downfall. Stabbed by those he trusted most, his empire crumbling from within because he couldn't surrender leadership to share power. Contrast this with leaders like Gandhi and Mother Teresa, who found their greatest influence by surrendering personal ambition to serve higher purposes. Gandhi's strength came not from grasping control, but from releasing it, allowing divine principles to guide his actions. Mother Teresa's power flowed not from commanding others, but from serving them, finding God in the faces of the forgotten and abandoned. The biblical story of Job illustrates this divine paradox perfectly. When he possessed wealth, health, and family, he thought he understood God's ways. But when everything was stripped away, his possessions, his children, his health, he discovered something greater than anything he had lost. In surrender, he found intimacy with the divine that prosperity had never provided. His losses became his gains. His emptiness became his fullness. His questions became his worship. Observe migratory birds during their incredible journeys across continents. They don't try to force the winds to blow in convenient directions. They don't exhaust themselves fighting against air currents. Instead, they ride thermal columns, glide on updrafts, and use the very resistance of headwinds to gain altitude. They've learned that struggle with natural forces is futile, but partnership with them is powerful. What if your pain is prying control from your hands so peace can take its place? What if the circumstances you're trying so desperately to manage are actually invitations to trust a wisdom greater than your own? What if surrender isn't defeat, but the very mechanism through which victory arrives? Adversity has always been the fire that forges greatness in human character. Frederick Douglass was born into slavery, treated as property rather than person, denied education and dignity. But within the brutal system designed to break his spirit, something unbreakable was being formed. Every lash of the whip was building his determination to be free. Every denial of his humanity was strengthening his resolve to claim his divine dignity. Every attempt to silence him was developing a voice that would echo through generations. When he finally gained his freedom, he didn't retreat into personal safety. He became a voice for millions still in chains. His enslavement became his qualification to lead the enslaved to freedom. Oprah Winfrey's childhood was marked by poverty, abuse, and trauma that could have permanently damaged her capacity for trust and love. Instead, every wound became a window into the hearts of others carrying similar pain. Her personal healing became public ministry. Her private victories became hope for millions of viewers who saw their own struggles reflected in her story. Her talk show wasn't just entertainment. It was a form of therapy, helping people understand that their pain could become their purpose. Their mess could become their message. The biblical account of Daniel and his friends in the fiery furnace reveals how divine presence is often most powerfully experienced in our most threatening circumstances. They were thrown into flames hot enough to kill the soldiers who threw them in, yet they emerged without even the smell of smoke on their clothes. The fire that was meant to consume them became the stage where God's protection was most clearly demonstrated. Their trial became their testimony, their persecution became their platform, their intended destruction became their divine revelation. Consider the caterpillar's mysterious transformation in the chrysalis. From the outside, it appears to be dying, dissolving completely into unrecognizable soup. But this apparent destruction is actually reconstruction on a cellular level. Every part of what it was must break down before it can become what it's destined to be. The struggle to emerge from the cocoon isn't unnecessary difficulty. It's the very process that strengthens the butterfly's wings for flight. Without the struggle, the butterfly would emerge too weak to survive. What if your pain is not burning you up, but burning away what no longer serves you? What if every trial is removing limitations you didn't even know you had? What if every challenge is revealing strength you never knew you possessed? Relationships often serve as mirrors, reflecting back to us both our greatest wounds and our hidden strength. The betrayal of Jesus by Judas wasn't an accident or a deviation from the divine plan. It was the very mechanism through which the path to resurrection was made clear. Sometimes we need to be betrayed by those we trust to discover the unshakable foundation of our own integrity. Sometimes we need to be abandoned by human supporters to find the divine support that never fails. Nelson Mandela's choice to forgive his jailers demonstrated a power greater than any revenge could have achieved. His willingness to transform bitterness into blessing became the healing balm a wounded nation desperately needed. His personal reconciliation with his oppressors became the model for racial reconciliation throughout South Africa. His private victory over resentment became public victory over apartheid. In the animal kingdom, wolves test each other through playful combat and challenging encounters. What appears to be aggression is actually assessment. The pack needs to know who can be trusted in life-threatening situations. These tests don't weaken the pack. They strengthen it by revealing who has the courage, loyalty, and resilience needed for survival. Pain creates stronger bonds between those who weather storms together. What if heartbreak isn't breaking you, but breaking you open? What if the person who hurt you the most is unconsciously preparing you to love with greater wisdom and discernment? What if every relationship challenge is developing your capacity for authentic intimacy and unconditional forgiveness? Divine timing operates on a schedule that rarely matches our human impatience. Winston Churchill was rejected repeatedly by his own party, dismissed as a warmonger and an outdated relic of Victorian politics. He spent years in the political wilderness, watching from the sidelines as less experienced leaders made decisions he knew would lead to disaster. But every year of rejection was building the credibility he would need when crisis demanded his particular combination of courage and eloquence. When World War II threatened to destroy democracy itself, Britain needed someone who had been warning about the danger for years, someone whose previous rejections had prepared him for ultimate acceptance. King David was anointed as Israel's future king while still a shepherd boy, but he spent years running from King Saul, hiding in caves, leading a band of misfits and outcasts. Those years of exile weren't wasted time. They were leadership training. Every challenge he faced while hiding developed the skills he would need while reigning. Every injustice he experienced built the empathy he would need to rule with wisdom and compassion. Bears endure long months of winter hibernation, their bodies slowing down, their activities restricted, their world shrinking to the confines of their dens. But this apparent dormancy is actually preparation. Their bodies are conserving energy, their systems are healing and renewing, their strength is being restored for the active season ahead. Without the rest of winter, they wouldn't have the vitality needed for spring's adventures. Could your delay be divine timing, not denial? Could the season of waiting you're enduring be preparation for opportunities that require greater strength than you currently possess? Could your apparent stagnation be divine gestation, preparing you to birth something beautiful into the world? Pain often converts into fuel for extraordinary achievement when we learn to transform it rather than just endure it. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team, a rejection that could have ended his athletic dreams. Instead, it ignited a fire within him that burned for decades. Every subsequent victory was powered by the memory of that initial defeat. His pain became his motivation, his rejection became his rocket fuel, his early failure became his lifelong inspiration. The sting of being told he wasn't good enough drove him to become arguably the greatest basketball player in history. Walt Disney's first animation company went bankrupt, leaving him financially devastated and professionally humiliated. He could have abandoned his creative dreams and found a safer, more conventional career. Instead, he used that failure as education, learning what didn't work so he could create something that did. His bankruptcy became his business school, teaching him lessons about creativity, persistence, and vision that no traditional education could have provided. His early failure became the foundation for an entertainment empire that has brought joy to billions. The Apostle Paul wrote about his thorn in the flesh, a persistent source of pain that he begged God to remove. But divine wisdom knew something Paul didn't. His weakness was the very place where God's strength could be most clearly demonstrated. His vulnerability became his credibility, his struggles became his ministry, his pain became his platform for helping others understand that divine grace is sufficient for every human weakness. So watch ants as they carry loads many times their own body weight. The very resistance they encounter while carrying these burdens is what builds their incredible strength. Without the weight, they would never develop the capacity needed for their complex community responsibilities. Their struggle doesn't weaken them. It creates the physical capability that makes their intricate social systems possible. Could the very weight that feels like it's crushing you today be the weight that's building you for tomorrow? Could your current struggles be developing spiritual muscles you'll need for future assignments? Could your pain be creating the very capacity required for the purpose you're being prepared to fulfill? True spiritual awakening often begins not with strength, but with the admission of weakness and vulnerability. Alcoholics Anonymous, one of the most successful recovery programs in history, was founded on the principle that healing begins when people stop pretending to be strong and start admitting they need help. This acknowledgement of powerlessness becomes the doorway to accessing a higher power that can accomplish what human willpower alone cannot achieve. The biblical promise that my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness, reveals a divine strategy that defies human logic. God's strength doesn't compete with our strength. It complements our weakness. Our limitations become the very spaces where divine capability can be most clearly demonstrated. Franklin D. Roosevelt's paralysis from polio could have ended his political career before it truly began. Instead, his physical limitations developed his emotional intelligence and his capacity for empathy. His personal battle with disability gave him unique insight into the struggles of ordinary people during the Great Depression. His wheelchair became his platform for leading a nation through some of its most challenging years. His physical weakness became his political strength. Elephants are among the few animals that demonstrably grieve their dead, returning to the bones of deceased family members, touching them gently with their trunks, standing in apparent meditation over the remains. This vulnerability, this willingness to feel pain rather than simply move on, creates deep bonds within elephant herds. Their shared grief becomes shared strength. Their mutual vulnerability becomes mutual protection. What if your weakness is the very place where God shows his greatest strength? What if your vulnerability is not a liability, but an opportunity for divine demonstration? What if the place where you feel most broken is precisely where breakthrough wants to manifest? The highest transformation occurs when our personal healing becomes a source of healing for others, when our private victories become public service. Malala Yousafzai was shot by the Taliban for advocating girls' education, an attack that could have silenced her voice forever. Instead, her survival became her platform. Her near-death experience amplified her message to a global audience. Her personal trauma became a universal call for educational equality. Her individual suffering became collective inspiration for millions of girls worldwide who saw in her story proof that they too could overcome any obstacle to pursue their dreams. The suffering of Jesus wasn't just personal sacrifice. It became the mechanism through which salvation was made available to all humanity. His individual pain became universal healing. His personal death became eternal life for others. His private agony became public redemption. The cross that was meant to silence him became the symbol through which his message reached every corner of the earth. Florence Nightingale's personal experience with illness and her family's resistance to her nursing aspirations could have deterred her from medical service. Instead, these challenges deepened her understanding of suffering and strengthened her resolve to alleviate it in others. Her personal hardships became professional qualification. Her individual healing journey became the foundation for modern nursing practices that have saved millions of lives. Observe bees in their tireless service to the hive. They work not for personal glory, but for the survival and prosperity of their entire community. Their individual efforts contribute to collective survival. Their personal industry creates communal abundance. Their willingness to sacrifice for others ensures the continuation of their species. Could your story of pain be the survival guide someone else is praying for right now? Could your testimony of triumph through trials be the hope that keeps someone else from giving up? Could your willingness to share your struggles honestly be the key that unlocks someone else's healing? Your suffering is not your end. It's the hidden curriculum of greatness, the divine education system that prepares ordinary people for extraordinary purposes. Every tear has been a tuition payment in the University of Transformations. Every struggle has been a course in resilience. Every loss has been a lesson in letting go so that something greater can take hold. The pain you've been begging to escape has actually been preparing you for the life you've been praying to live. Your wounds are becoming your qualifications. Your struggles are becoming your strength. Your trials are becoming your testimony. Your mess is becoming your message. Your pain is becoming your purpose. Awaken the divine within, and let your suffering become your success. The world is waiting for the unique healing that can only flow through someone who has walked your particular path of pain and emerged with your specific brand of hope. Your story isn't over, it's just beginning. And the best chapters are always written by those who have learned to transform their deepest wounds into their greatest gift. The doorway you've been looking for isn't behind you in some easier past or ahead of you in some perfect future. It's right here, right now, in the very pain you've been trying to escape. Walk through it. Your destiny is waiting on the other side.